In the first video, it took me about 1 minute to create a project, web component project using Vite, which is the next generation front-end tooling. This is a fantastic new tool which behind the scene uses ESM modules for the development server and also uses rollup as the bundler. And the guy who was the creator of Vue is the creator Ivan Yu, or Evan Yu is also the creator of this Vite. So really brutally fantastic tool. You have seen it. 1 minute. In 1 minute it was capable of creating a project, a web component project. And in this video I'm going to give an explanation about the anatomy of a web component using the counter example generated by these Vite examples. And then the tool which is used, again a fantastic new tool set, and together with this Vite and Lit together is super brilliant. So this is based on the web components. If you don't know a lot about web components are natively supported by all of the browsers today. And then this provides, the web components provides you a component model, and in practice you don't need any more React, because Lit provides you reactive programming just based on the web browser technology. You don't need any proprietary toolings like React and Angular or even Vue or whatever way you pronounce it. So therefore these are the main two tools that I'm going to explain, and actually that's all. These are all what I'm using. The rest is just regular web component standard technology used in the browsers. The only reason I'm using Lit, because Lit makes creating web components and creating web component based applications, web application in general makes so much easier. So that's is my explanation video here. So this is my Litimer, actually Litimer project which I just created in the first video. And this Vite project creates a Vite config.ts, which is for a library. Very often web components are created for libraries, reusable component libraries. In our application we are not making, I'm not making these library components, so therefore I don't need. So let me just rename this configuration Vite config to delete later, because then when we are building the application it is going to build a regular web application. So if you don't have any configuration option, then by default Vite creates a regular web application. Okay, and then the anatomy. Let's have a look. We have here the index HTML. Let's start from the beginning. We have the regular HTML header part, no reference to any external libraries. And what is amazing and interesting, that immediately in the under the body you can see, you don't see any div section, you can see the my element, and this my element here is a web component. The official term is custom element, and when you have custom elements you can recognize them because there is always a hyphen. At least one hyphen is mandatory when giving a name web component. So this is part of the browser. So the browser doesn't allow you to create a custom element without a dash between, at least one dash. So my element is our web component, and then interestingly it also has it sandwiches this is child content. We will see it later how this web component handles this embedded structure. The entry point of this application, because you cannot see what could be the entry point. In a web application, the entry point here is this my element application that is imports lit. Lit is automatically included into the dependencies. That's the only dependency we use. Of course, this lit, just the infrastructure, very similar in concept to React, but lit uses only web standard technology. And but if you need say user interface, you can use Bootstrap or Material CSS or any CSS library at your will. But this application, this demonstration which I just focus on the bare bones, the details. So this is the only dependency we have here, and then these are then the elements that we have to import from this lit. The HTML, this is the heart of the system, a CSS management library, the lit element library, which is used to create custom elements. And then also we have a couple of decorators. The reason we can use decorators, because when I created this project, I selected TypeScript as the application. TypeScript makes creating or using lit a lot simpler, and one of the reason it is important, let me just show you where is this experimental decorator. So in your tsconfig.json the true should be included, because then we can use these decorators. What are the decorators? These are the decorators. That is, when you create a web component, is the same as a custom component, a custom element. This is the official term in documentation, in browser documentation. And then a web component that is a custom element should be registered, and this decorator is a convenient way. Actually, even with plain regular JavaScript is very simple to create register a web component. All web components are classes. Remember that the browser, all the browsers are just about classes and object oriented. So if you go into the elements and if you go into the details how it looks, everywhere you can see this is a component, and even the name, the document DOM, DOM, document object model, the object. So everything in a browser are objects. So this custom element is nothing more than an extension of this infrastructure, just another level, a custom element, a custom class registered with this new name. So this is the way my element, this is the way you can reference in the body, and then when it is registered in your browser you can use as if it were a built-in HTML tag, an HTML element, to say so. To make our life easier, so usually when you don't use lit, you extend your classes, custom elements from the regular HTML element, but here lit element just gives some additional, I will explain to what additional features, for example this decorator, support for these decorators, that makes web component development, custom element building easier. Even if you work with regular regular JavaScript, or I mean without lit element, it's that easy, very easy. It has only three callback functions, 3 or 4 callback functions that you have to use, and that's all. The second thing, after having a class, the class, that is every web component is self-contained, and that they are working with shadow DOMs. If you check out that here is the structure of our website, and then our main element, there is a fancy name here, shadow root. This is what we call shadow DOM, the shadow document object model, and it is nothing as just an internal build structure how a component is built. Actually, this is quite straightforward to understand, because this is the render function. I don't want to jump too much, but this is how you build your internal component. This is what we call encapsulation, the hiding of the details. So from the top of the web site, what you can see is just a my element. I will explain to what is this. This is a child component, the content, but you cannot see the details. The details, however, can be visible here. This is part of the shadow DOM, and this shadow DOM is a hiding and encapsulation machinery, and this encapsulation is especially interesting and important for style handling, and lit provides a tagged template literal function. This is called CSS. HTML is another template literal. So this is looks a weird syntax, but if you are familiar with tagged template literals, and if you are have you ever worked with templates? This is just tagged templates. This is a template format with interpolation. This is an interpolation expression, absolutely standard, nothing special here. So what you can see here, this is, for example, just compare it with React. If you are familiar with React or Angular, they have invented their own proprietary templating technology. Here the lit and regular browser supported component technology, you don't need to use any proprietary toolset, because templating is available here, and it is just regular JavaScript, nothing special. JavaScript which you can use in non-browser environments too. And so coming back to the CSS, so this is just a fancy syntax for this tag literal. A tag literal function are provided from the lit library, and then this CSS is pumped or injected into the shadow DOM, because the main idea behind the shadow DOM, that all styling to avoid collisions of the outside environment is separated. So the shadow DOM CSS styling is not interfering and cannot be interfered with the outside environment. So that's why, as we say that the styling of a web component, or also the internal implementation, is self-contained and separated. So that's the whole idea of web components: reusable, self-contained, encapsulated components out of the box. One more thing before I going ahead, there is a possibility to use custom elements without shadow DOM. This is what we call light DOM. that is when we work with the global CSS styling scape or the global environment, the browser. Suppose this is the regular way. For example, React, Angular, all of their component model are working only in the light DOM, so they have no concept for the shadow DOM. When you work with web components, you have the option to decide if you want to use shadow DOM or you want to work with light DOM. And also Lit Element supports both, either to create your components as part of the global space, the global scope. This is what we call light DOM, or you can create the implementation of every component as part of the shadow DOM encapsulated. In this example, I'm working only with the shadow DOM because that's what is interesting and that's the novelty of this tool set. So when you use a styling, the styling are not created outside of in CSS files. You cannot see here any CSS files. This should be part of the styles. Of course, it is possible to create a separate CSS file and then just simply reuse these files here. That's going to be a topic of another video. Here we have just the encapsulated part of the component definition, the styles that are used here in this component. Then we have properties. Then here the default value for the property and attribute are more or less interchangeable term. That, for example, let's just come back to this index HTML. When we have here my element, and then this is what we call and the attributes. So when I'm coming back here, that's the name of the attribute, and the property is either okay, I don't go into the details. A property is by default an attribute from the perspective of the HTML. So that is, we can define here name equals to for example Vite. The default value is world because here it wasn't defined, the property. However, when you define the property value here, I intentionally don't use here double quotes just to make a application, and when I'm saving it, here you go, it's automatically and immediately applied. This is the way you can define easily attributes and properties for your application. You see the name. Okay, so let me just make the application as I proceed. The next is another property, the number of times the button has been clicked, and then this is another property. This add property, this is just a decorator. Then the decorators are, again, just remember these are functions and they can be used in TypeScript, no problem. I think they can also be used with regular JavaScript, but then you need some transpilers, Babel transpilers or whatever. But in TypeScript, the decorators are part of the language, especially when you enable these settings which I just explained a minute ago. And then when you have here a property which is not a string, keep in mind, in HTML world, every attribute is a string. Even when you think it's a boolean, no, it's not really boolean, it's just a string. Every property is by default string. So however, every attribute, HTML attribute, if you want this to be used as a number, then you can define here that this attribute or property is a is a number, and then this is the default value. And therefore, that's why when we start clicking, this is the way we can start, excuse me, we can start clicking. However, because this is also a property, and we can also use this here as a counter. If I don't remember correctly, we can say 10, then Control S. Was that counter? No, it was just count. It was just count. Count, Control S. Here you go, and then click count 10. This is the initial value then for this count. Therefore, that's the easy way to manage. And also one more thing that is important, that when you define a property, this is automatically part of the state of this component. That is, lit automatically creates listeners for this, listeners for these elements, for these member data variables of part of this object, name and count, and whenever their value is changed, therefore then the referencing component are also changed. Just check out what's happening here. This name property is an attribute. So from the perspective of the web component, we call it property. From the perspective of the HTML, we call them attribute. That's the differentiation. So from the perspective of the web component, this is how we reference in our expressions, template expressions. We call it whatever way, backtick, literals, and with this extrapolation or interpolating operations, template operations. So this is how we call it. This is needed because this is an object with a class, so therefore that's why we are referencing this is a member variable of this class, of this object. And then another is that when we display the current value of the count, and because they are marked as property, therefore whenever this is the service of this lit infrastructure, whenever any value is changed because they are also the states, then this is re-rendered, and then the new values will be displayed accordingly. I will show you later how it is implemented with this HTML. The render function is an override. We are in TypeScript, so this is absolutely possible. We don't have to call here the support and the super.render. We can, but it's not necessary at all. We don't have to call because lit element doesn't provide any machinery. This render function is a kind of callback by the lit element machinery. That is, whenever a new state is required, a new rendering, the state is changed and a new rendering is required, then it calls into this render function. So we don't have to provide the machinery, we just define. This is what we call declarative reactive programming. We just declare the variables, the state variables, the state properties of our application, and whenever their values are changed, lit element infrastructure automatically calls into the render function, and then based on this machinery, it paints the contents on the web page. But there is an enormous, and that's here is the heart of this whole HTML. We call it lit HTML. That's brutally powerful machinery. What you can see here, that you have a template. This is a HTML template, a tagged template literal function, and then here is the whole function. But whenever it is this rendering is called, it doesn't paint again and again the whole machinery, the whole page. Instead, only makes a differentiation calculation and only re-renders the whole DOM object, in our case in the shadow DOM, that are really changed since the previous state. Check out how it works. When I'm just check out here, when I start clicking, you see only this part has been changed, and all this machinery is provided by HTML. So that is, if, and keep in mind this, the return type of this render function is not the regular string, it is a template result. That's the return value, template result. So this HTML analyzes the whole structure, creates an internal structure, and behind the scene it compares to the previous state, and it does it automatically. So this HTML tagged template literal is not a new invention. This has been developed. The whole lit infrastructure was an offspring or the next iteration of the Google's Polymer project. So the whole infrastructure behind, the whole team behind lit element, lit HTML are the Google people working for Google in the Polymer project. But this is the new term, lit and lit element. And then this machinery is available to you. Again, just check out, when I just clicking, only this part has been modified. That's the machinery. I will show you later in the next videos, when I'm creating my timer, how impressive and brutally powerful this HTML, lit HTML tag template literal. And keep in mind, and in my opinion, this is the heart of really this technology. Because this lit HTML can be used without this lit element. So this is a completely independent technology. So you can use it your regular web applications either. And then this is a total replacement of JSX. If you ever work with React, they have again a brilliant and excellent machinery, but that's a proprietary machinery. It is called JSX, JavaScript extension or something, which is all provides something similar in functionality, but that's proprietary. It requires special transpilation. But here, this is regular JavaScript. It requires no transpilation. This is directly executed by the browser. This HTML is just a JavaScript function which does the machinery of differentiating and displaying only the function, only the part that has really been changed. So that was rendering. And one more, a couple of features that provides also this HTML tag or tagged template literal function is, for example, event handlers. And in our case, we have here this on-click, and this on-click provides immediately an event handling. Of course, here we can also define the event, something like event. You see, this is just our, and we can also, of course, console.log saying that on click, and to check out what's happening here, just save it. Let's click it here, go to the console, and this is a pointer event. And what is immediately interesting, that if you ever work with event handlers, there is always an issue when the class the class function, the class member function, this is what we call the member syntax. is used here instead of lambda expression, that usually causes a problem that the binding of the this is bound to this button object. In event handling actually it is, or bound to the class, and then lit automatically this HTML machinery is so smart that it detects, hey, that this is a function belonging to the class, and then automatically provides this bind feature. So you don't have to binding here, it is automatically done by the HTML infrastructure. Of course, we could also use here, let me just do it, like event, and then just implement this dot count plus plus. Yeah, comment this section out from here. Here you go. In that case, immediately my browser displays that we don't use this on click anymore. I can even comment it out, and then we can use, of course, here lambda expression the regular and the usual way, and let's check out if it works. Save it, and when I count, yes, it works, of course, immediately same. It's really so therefore up to you if you use this style or you use lambda expression. It's really up to you. This part in concept is very similar the way you are programming in React. Very similar. So when you are working with the legacy, I call today legacy, React legacy programming, you don't need anymore. You can migrate upgrade your project over to this brilliant new browser native technology provided by Vite and Lit. Here you can use, because the concept is reactive as I demonstrated here, and also all the tools are standard tools. Right, and then the part, let me just check out. Okay. What else do we have here? We have here again a very fancy feature called slot. And this slot, just check out what you can see on the screen. On the screen you can see that hello Vite, because then you can see hello Vite. Yes, this comes from, of course, from the property as I explained. And then button, here is our button with the click event handler. And then we have here click count. This is the title of the button, and here is the value of the counter. But what the heck is this slot? And we can see here, this is child content. We haven't defined here in our implementation in the Shadow DOM. We have seen here just a slot. But what is interesting that it reveals when I click it here in the debugger on the browser, it checks out that this is child content, and then this reveals, and this is a link, that is, this slot will be the place of the rendering of this component. So the slot is the embedded, or the part which is sandwiched between the opening tag and the closing tag. This is what we call the slot. In the next iteration I will explain that you have the option to create multiple slots, and if you define in your element a slot without a name, then this is what we call the default slot. When you want to create multiple slots, say, yeah, why not, just let me just create it here, another slot name, let's call it before, something like that. Here you go. So this is the slot before. And then the slot before is empty. However, when we have a have a look in the shadow root, we can see here that we have a slot name, but it is empty. In the before slot is empty. And in a slot, you have to define a default implementation of a slot. Default impl of slot named before, not that before, but before, Control S. Here you go. So this is the default implementation. And of course, if you are the application developer, I mean the website designer, and you don't want this silly thing to happen here, you can define any element. You can say a paragraph with slot equals to before, because I just gave this name. It really doesn't matter. It's really up to you what name you provide. And then you can define here even an empty name, or just say 2 x's, or maybe just a dot, whatever. When I can, oh, here you go. It's the default implementation, the default contents of the slot disappears. And when I just delete it, it just, I'm suppressing here that the before slot. I don't want this to be, but of course here I can, here comes the counter button. And that's coming from, from the HTML page. So this is the way you can custom, and of course the ordering is really unimportant, because wherever for the tags there where you don't use the slot attribute, they are going into the default slot. Where you define the slot name, they go to the name slot. So the ordering doesn't matter. Just let me just add another paragraph here, that saying that another default slot content. Here you go. So they both go into the default slots, this location. Of course, the default slot could also have an implementation. Here in this case this is absolutely empty, like so. It's really up to you. So this works only in Shadow DOM. So if you want to use slots, and because slots provide you a brilliant customizability solution, this is part of the browser. So nothing proprietary here. This is coming from the Shadow DOM services from any browser. This is Microsoft Microsoft Edge, and also it's supported also by the Google Chrome, any browser on Macintosh or the Mac computers. So every browser supports, even browsers on the iPhones or Android devices. All of this machinery are readily available for you. You just exploit them and use them for your next generation of component-based web applications. So this was just an explanation of the slots, and then this was the anatomy of how this HTML part works. And then comes this I just explained, and this foo.string is an interesting feature. It is not used here. What it wants to say that even in this application that you can have here functions, and then when you work with application, let me just show you. If I click here in the browser, then it displays a $0, and when I'm coming into the $0 and I enter $0, and then I press dot, because this is derived from this whole is derived from the lit element. It shows all of the lit element functions. And then lit element is derived from the HTML element, which is the standard. And then also we have our foo. If I just enter foo here you go, it returns foo, because this is the function. And of course I can also call it 0.foo, and it returns a string. So that is, these functions are available for your application. That is the methods, custom methods that you are creating. Whatever method you can create, asynchronous method, any operations are available for the JavaScript application, web application developers. So you can also invoke this application from within this application. That is, when you use a query selector, you can find your component, and then you can invoke any operations defined as part. That's absolutely brilliant. So this kind of component, and this is part of the web browser technology, really customizability. You don't have to build your own proprietary applications anymore. All of these tools and features are available immediately, readily available from the web application developer. And then this last component, which is called declare global interface. This is only for TypeScript programmers. We don't need this at all for regular, and it is not mandatory, so you can simply skip it out. And so what the trick is here, that for TypeScript programmers, and when you references a my element component, it will automatically assign this to this class, and then therefore you can somehow make your life easier, because you can you don't have to apply type definitions. But as I mentioned, this is absolutely not necessary, and then we can just simply use it. So that was, my friends, a quick explanation. And what is interesting, that CSS part, the reason it is mentioned, but I don't go into the details, is that when you define parts, for example here, you can use this definition in your CSS definitions. Therefore, that is part of the styling and theming of application. That's going to be handled in a different video. So that was just, let me say, quick, but it was not so quick. I really tried to explain to you the main elements, really the anatomy of this application of a web component, and how it is used, what are the slots, how they are used, what are the CSS, what are the styling, and what are the what is shadow DOM, how it is used, and what HTML tag template literal is doing when implementing. As you can see here again, the slot, now it reveals that we have to, and again, what is important, that these components are not moved under the slot, they are just referenced by the slot. So therefore no data, this is just a referencing structure here, not a complete rebuilding of the application. And again, let me just show you the heart of this reactive machinery provided by the lit. So this functionality is coming from the lit, that you don't have to rebuild your complete DOM from scratch. Only lit HTML provides you this machinery for the diffing, the differential comparison of the old and new version of your application. So thank you for the attention. The next iteration, we are going to start building a new custom element, a new web component. Remember, custom element and web component, they are the same thing.